Okay, so there's 3 somatotypes. What are those? If you think of somatotypes, we're talking about body types, and they're kind of been broken down into 3 categories. And what's interesting about these somatotypes is the study and this concept came up like in the 1940s. Well, there was a psychologist actually who was trying to identify personality types based on how people were built. And so all of that stuff has pretty much been squashed. Like there's not a lot of validity to that, as you can imagine. Yeah, as you can imagine. But it did lead to some other curious or interesting things just in terms of how people might apply exercise or apply diets specific to changing their bodies. So anyway, there's kind of 3 categories, and we'll start kind of with the one that probably everybody wants, right, in the fitness industry, and that's the mesomorph. So we have the mesomorph, the endomorph, and the ectomorph. So starting at the top with the mesomorph, that is your individual that's got like broad shoulders, narrow waist, good muscle, like I guess muscle bellies in the right places. They seemingly kind of already have almost like a bodybuilder-esque physique. And then it's just kind of adding on top of that. So if you're any professional bodybuilder could be defined as like a mesomorph because they just have some genetically, they've been predisposed to have some characteristics that just set them up really well for that. Versus like, well, and we'll get to this one, the ectomorph or the hard gainer, we can define it as that. As hard as they try, they will never, ever, ever be competitive against the mesomorph at like let's say even the amateur, but certainly the professional level. They're just not set up well for this. And it's not that they can't put on muscle, and it's not that they can't look great and they can't be a quote unquote bodybuilder. Their body type isn't really set up that way. So a couple of characteristics, again, a little bit broader shoulders, narrower waist, kind of that automatic, like just V taper, right? From the get-go. They generally don't carry a lot of body fat. And so they kind of always look lean, or you might even consider it fit. Everybody knows one of these people, right? That doesn't seemingly have to work very hard to look good with their shirt off kind of all the time. I've had plenty of friends like this, growing up, and I do not fit into that category. But that's the mesomorph category. The endomorph category is more of like a boxy or blocky shape, right? That's me. Right, my hips
fire hydrant mailbox.
There you go, a fire hydrant with arms on it. Right, so you got maybe broader shoulders, but the hips are probably just as wide. You don't have quite that V taper like naturally or skeletally in your structure, and you could probably carry a little bit more body fat. Your body's probably a little bit more comfortable there, and you're good at lifting heavy shit. Right, like you're just kind of set up that way. The other thing there is, in like anatomically, your bones might even be a little bit thicker. Now, just going back to the study with the somatotypes, like people talking about, oh, I'm just big boned.
I'm big boned. I'm husky.
Yeah. Being big boned and having larger bone structure are 2 different things. And maybe one way to look at this is like if you think of like the Kenyan runners, like those are ectomorphs, right? Those are folks that they're long and lean, right? And they have the same bones anybody else has, the same number of bones, the same, but the girth on those bones is a little, and then their muscle structure is different, right? So there is something to this. I was just asked this as a guest on another podcast, like, do you buy into this? I absolutely do. There's some science around this. And there's quite a bit of study around how these body types do exist. Again, there can be some overlapping.
I was going to say, yeah, because you can have like an endo-ecto or a meso-endomorph when it comes to body types.
There's no clear defined black and white line here, but that's your mesomorph. Or excuse me, your endomorph. That's the person that's a little bit larger in structure just in general. If you think of a power lifter, think of like your strongman competitors. Going back to if you're a mesomorph, you could still be a really good power lifter, right? But if you're an ectomorph, you could be a good power lifter, but you're probably not, ever going to compete at the same weight at the same strength levels as the really advanced endomorph or mesomorph. So just, again, giving some people some context here. And then we get to the ectomorph, which is generally that person that's a little smaller shoulder girdle, a little smaller hip structure, longer, usually a little taller, not all the time. Sometimes you can have this structure, you're just shorter in stature, in terms of height. and not a ton of muscle mass to begin with. You're just not, really well built with a ton of extra mass on your body. Again, going back to like those Kenyan runners, it's just like everybody's seen those folks running. They look like gazelles, when they're running. They're tall, they're lean. Generally, the fastest ones on the earth generally are. When you're looking at the males, again, comparative to females or whatnot. So a little tougher to put on muscle on a frame that's not already set up that way, and on a bone structure that isn't going to accentuate the muscle that you do put on your frame. And then generally those folks have what we could refer to as a little higher metabolism, right? They generally stay pretty lean. Even when they don't have a lot of muscle mass on their frame, they're generally quote unquote skinny. And that can be, again, that's the person that we don't generally talk about a lot. So again, just kind of, if you can kind of get that in your head, where we are is that last category in the ectomorph, and how to help that person kind of get around the challenges of putting on weight, more specifically putting on muscle.